Hello, this is the weekly Tradecast. I'm Sarah Toms. All this month, we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of UN Trade and Development with a series of special episodes. We're talking about how trade and development transforms lives and builds better futures. And we're looking at the big themes that will drive our vital work in the next 60 years. Coming up now,
if we choose a more inclusive economy, if we choose the Sustainable Development Goals, if we choose collective action, collaboration, and solidarity, we can have a better world than the one that we have now.
This week, we have a very special guest, Secretary General Rebeca Grynspan. We'll be talking about her vision for UN trade and development, how to address new challenges, and why we must move forward together to create an inclusive and sustainable future. Founded in 1964 as the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, our organisation promotes a fairer economic system and helps developing countries to access the benefits of global trade. Now, UN Trade and Development is building on 6 decades of success as our work evolves to keep improving the lives of billions of people around the world. Well, what does it take to lead this global organisation? And what is her perspective on the course of development in a changing world? Well, to find out, we're joined now by Rebeca Grynspan. She's an economist, a former vice president of Costa Rica, and also the first woman to lead UN Trade and Development in its 60-year history. Well, thank you for joining us, Secretary General.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back again. Well, 60 years, of course, is a huge milestone for UN Trade and Development. So just to set the scene a little for us, what's the state of the global economy right now? And are we heading in the right direction?
The global economy is undergoing significant changes, and we need to prepare for those. It's crucial that we chart a new course for development to meet the challenges ahead. That's how we are approaching our 60th anniversary.
Right.
Countries have to prepare for this new economy, but there are things that we have to do collectively for the system to be fairer, to be less asymmetric in terms of the impacts that the developing countries are undergoing. And they have less instruments to face the systemic shocks that are shaking the international economy. UNCTAD has been there from the beginning, for the developing countries. That's how we were born, precisely in 1964, because there was a problem, because there were changes, because developing countries were being left behind by the economic system. And so today we have to renew that commitment, to look at our past with pride. But the other point that I make all the time is that it's not enough with the national effort, that there are systemic issues that we need to face together, that the institutions at the international level have to look at and have to be able to adapt more quickly to support inclusive development. Because if we don't, it won't happen.
Are we really ready for what the future is bringing?
No, I don't think so. The changes have taken us like a storm. And that's part of the problem, yes. The events are quicker than the reaction to the events. Not all sectors adapt at the same pace. Societies, communities don't adapt at the same pace. So that is a worry. How do we help communities, societies, countries to adapt quicker in a better way to the changes that are happening? I think that our job in a broad sense is precisely that one, is to be able to understand profoundly what is happening, to help countries people, communities, societies to adapt in a way that will not leave them behind. And to be able to push for the awareness that we need in the world, for cooperation, for solidarity, for the changes of the institutions to be able to help for a world that will be more fair, more equitable for everybody.
What do you see then as the main challenges, and where are the opportunities then?
We are in an economy that is growing very slow for most of the developing countries that don't have the finance of development that we need for the SDGs. So the flows of financing and resources are not going to the most vulnerable and the poorest of this world, where trade and investment are weak. And if trade and investment are weak, what are the possibilities of the developing countries to make it happen? We need even more than we needed before, because we need to make the transition to a more sustainable planet. So we need to take care of people and planet at the same time, and the conditions are not there to make it happen. I think that that is the main challenge. That's why we say the SDGs are too big to fail. We have a road forward. The SDGs and the Paris Agreement are the road forward. But we don't have the enabling factors to make it happen. We still have time. We are not on track because only 15% of the SDGs are being on track to be met. But we will have to take bold action to go from thinking about it, talking about it, to really act on it.
But there are some bright spots. What would you say are the opportunities?
Well, I think that the digital and the technology changes are an opportunity. But as always, it's an opportunity and a risk. I really think that the digital economy can really make many of the countries leapfrog to a better future. You can see what it can do for health, for example, and what this can do for productivity, and what this can do for changing and allowing diversification of the productive structures in many of our countries. We can see how the energy transition can be a huge opportunity for the countries that have the critical minerals to make it happen, and for them to be inserted in the global value chains in a much better way. But at the same time, if we don't do what we have to do for those countries to have the access to the resources, to the technology, to the trade opportunities, for that to happen, then the gaps will grow. Instability will be even higher. Societies will be disenchanted. Democracies will suffer. So there is no doubt that the action is needed to allow the opportunities that we see that are real to manifest themselves for the majority of the population of the world.
How would you say UN trade and development is evolving, and what fundamental changes do we need in our economies, institutions, societies to ensure a more inclusive and resilient future that you talk of?
We are really on time given evidence, data, analysis for decision making where the things are happening, when we still are able to change the course of events for the better. I think that we are much better in doing that now than before, that we partner in a more effective way with the rest of the UN system to make, the case and the voice of these countries stronger, and be able to be at the table with proposals and a perspective that enriches the global conversation. And we are more present and more active in the different fora where it's important to have that voice. We have an analysis of what is happening in trade and investment that really enriches the conversation. And we are able to put the challenges ahead. We see the weakness that trade and investment are showing. We see the fracture and the possibility for fragmentation of the international economy. And we know that that will really hurt the possibilities for development for many of the countries that we represent. So in trade and investment, I think that we have done a very good job, and we have to continue understanding these new trends, these new elements to be able to manage them better. In financing, no doubt, we have been the voice of what the heavy debt burden is doing in terms of development. We have called it a crisis of development because 3.3 billion people live in countries that are spending more in servicing the debt than on education or health. We see the reversal of the financing flows where, there are net transfers of resources from the south to the north instead of the north to the south. And I think that we have been very effective in putting those problems forward in the global arena. And obviously the whole issue of climate change and environmental deterioration and how that affects the capacity of the developing countries to make the transformations for a more sustainable growth and sustainable future. And the other thing that I think that we have been putting more and more also at the center is the issue of gender and, be very serious about what we need to do for the inclusion of women in trade as an opportunity for equality and for improvement of their lives and their families to be faster, better, and more effective.
You talk a lot about collaboration. With so many competing priorities and voices, where are you seeing the most encouraging signs of collaboration and action on these most pressing issues?
Well, we are completely with the Secretary General of the UN on the proposals in the Summit of the Future in terms of the reform of the international financial system. I think that we can do much more with what we have, and that also reforms for the system to be more inclusive in terms of governance are necessary. This is not something that can happen from one day to the other. Structural reforms are slow to happen, but we have to start. We have to start the conversation, and we have to start the process. We see in the multilateral development banks movement towards a different system of guarantees for investment to happen in the developing countries, to crowd in private investment in important sectors, infrastructure, digital, etc. We want more quality growth and a growth that is more sustainable. The capacity of the international system to respond has to be leveraged, has to increase. So we need the private sector, we need the markets, but we need the capacity of the state and of the international governance to put all the elements at the same time. The phrase of the best industrial policy is the one that doesn't exist has disappeared. Yes, that was the 80s and the 90s. But right now, industrial policy is back. The role of the state is back. And we have to get it right. We have to get the balance, the capacities, the policies that are the right ones for the results to improve. There are important things happening that are positive. And it's important to emphasize them also. I see opportunities in regional cooperation because we have the African Free Trade Area in which the opportunities for Africa are immense. And the Africa continent will be the most populated where the young will come from. I think that regional cooperation will have to come again as an important aspect of the agenda, where countries will come together and blocs will come together, not to retreat from international trade, but to participate more effectively in international trade. What we call open regionalism, to build the world, not to fragment the world. The other thing that is different today is also that South-South trade is bigger than North-North trade. This is a huge change in the last 20 to 30 years. And China is obviously an important part of this happening. But even if you take away China, South-South trade is growing at a much faster pace than the rest of trade. And there, UNCTAD has an important role to play because we have been one of the institutions that have put South-South cooperation and collaboration, knowledge sharing, capacity building at the center of our activities. And there, I think that the voice of the UN and the voice of UNCTAD has been a very important voice to push for the reforms that we need at the international level to enable the countries to take advantage of these huge opportunities. We have to recognize that the multilateral development banks are taking actions, that they have been positive steps in the IMF, that the voice of the UN is being heard more strongly in the G20 and in the global discourse. So those are positive signs. If we choose a more inclusive economy, if we choose the Sustainable Development Goals, if we choose collective action, collaboration, and solidarity, we can have a better world than the one that we have now.
Well, talking about a better world, what would you most like UN Trade and Development to accomplish in the next 60 years?
We have to continue to be the voice of the South, the voice of the developing countries, to be able to even expand our analysis and contribution to raise the awareness from the perspective of the developing world, to continue to be, in a way, also the voice of the values of solidarity, of collaboration, of collective action, of fighting the asymmetries in the world, allowing for the benefits of development to be spread more equally, more even. And I think that if we can continue to provide this data, evidence-based analysis on the one hand, on the other hand, technical cooperation to enhance the capacities of the countries to make it happen by their own, and if we can continue to be a voice for consensus building, for understanding, building the bridges between the North and the South, if we can continue to do this in an effective way, in a way that is capable of communicating much better what is at stake, and for that to be able to be the fuel for positive action and understanding, that is the UNCTAD that I would like to see in the next 60 years.
Thank you so much. That was UN Trade and Development Secretary General Rebeca Grynspan, who was this week's guest. Tune into the weekly Tradecast next week and every week for more insights on the most pressing issues around the world of trade and development. And there's even more on our website, unctad.org. I'm Sarah Thompson Geneva. Goodbye for now.